Okay, so you've given us like a ton of stuff on enterprise risk management, ERM,
It's
and
topic.
it is a big topic. And our mission here is to kind of like boil it down to the essentials for you so you can really get a handle on, what it is, how it's changed over time, why it matters so much, all the different ways companies approach it, the frameworks they use, all that good stuff.
Absolutely.
We're mainly looking at this unit guide you gave us, so
Perfect.
let's dive right in.
Let's do it. So
And I think what's really interesting right off the bat is just, even thinking about the definition of risk itself.
yeah,
It's not like this fixed thing,
right,
but we do have some good places to start.
right. Yeah, let's start there. So ISO 31000 back in 2018, they defined risk as the effect of uncertainty on objectives.
Right.
What do you think is like the key takeaway from that?
I think the really important bit there is that it acknowledges that uncertainty, it's not just about bad stuff happening.
Mm-hmm.
It can have all sorts of effects, right? Positive, negative, or a mix of both.
Yeah. So a risk isn't always something to like shy away from it. It could actually open up new possibilities.
Mm.
And I think David Hilson's definition really captures this, uncertainties that matter. It's about honing in on what could really impact whether you achieve your goals or not.
That makes a lot of sense. And then there's the Institute of Risk Management up in 2002. They said risk is the combination of the probability of an event and its consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And they also said those consequences can be good or bad.
Yeah.
So it seems like this idea of uncertainty and its potential impact keeps coming up.
Absolutely. And yet it's interesting, as your sources point out, that a lot of organizations still kind of by default see risk as a negative thing.
Yeah.
Purely as the potential for things to go wrong.
Right.
So they might treat opportunities and threats very differently.
That's an interesting point, given these broader definitions. Why do you think that negative view of risk is still so common in practice?
I think it often boils down to this focus on protection, on avoiding losses, which is kind of human nature, right?
Yeah.
And then negative impacts, they're felt more immediately, and they tend to have these direct and very visible consequences.
Right.
So the opportunity side, it requires a different way of thinking and a willingness to actively go after potential gains, which can feel riskier in itself.
That's a really good point. Now, one of our sources talks about these 4 categories of risk from Hopkin, compliance, hazard control, and opportunity.
Right.
How should we think about these in terms of what we're talking about?
So for our purposes here, I think it's helpful to see those first three, the compliance, the hazard, and the control risks, as mostly representing those potential downsides.
Okay.
The negative side of all this uncertainty we've been discussing.
Yeah.
And then opportunity risk obviously sits on the positive side.
Yeah.
The source makes this clear to keep things straight for this deep dive.
Makes sense. So if risk is really all about these uncertainties that can seriously impact what we're trying to do, what does risk management actually mean?
At its simplest, it's about doing something about those uncertainties that really matter. The big goal is to give organizations the tools to really grasp and manage the risks they face, taking into account their specific situation and what they're trying to achieve.
Okay, in ISO 31000, they give us a more formal definition. Coordinated activities to direct and control an organization with regard to risk.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like risk management is a pretty crucial part of running an organization.
It really is.
Yeah.
It means that risk management isn't some separate department or something you just tack on.
Yeah.
It's at the heart of how you manage things.
Right.
It should inform and support everything an organization does.
So then how does enterprise risk management, or ERM, build on all of this? It seems like it's taking that same approach, but on an organization-wide scale.
Exactly. ERM is basically risk management.
Yeah.
But looking at the whole organization.
Mm-hmm.
James Lamb, back in 2003, he said, ERM is the integrated management of business risk, financial risk, operational risk, and risk transfer to maximize a firm's shareholder value.
Okay.
The key word there is integrated. It's about having one unified and consistent way to look at and handle risks at every level and in every part of the organization.
Got it. And you gave us this really useful comparison from KPMG from 2006, where they looked at traditional risk management versus ERM.
Yeah.
What were the big differences they pointed out?
Well, the major shift was moving away from managing risks in isolation.
Okay.
Where each department might have its own way of dealing with potential problems.
Right.
And moving towards recognizing that risks are all interconnected.
I see.
So think about launching a new product that relies on this complex global supply chain.
Okay.
Traditionally, the risks of developing that product and the risks of the supply chain, they might be managed separately.
Mm-hmm.
But ERM It forces you to consider how a problem in that supply chain, an operational risk, could totally derail the product launch.
Yeah.
And then that could hurt the company's strategic goals and even its reputation.
That interconnectedness seems really crucial. You can't just look at risks in a vacuum. And then there's the COSO definition from 2017. The culture, capabilities, and practices integrated with strategy setting and its execution that organizations rely on to manage risk in creating, preserving, and realizing value. This one seems to go beyond just processes and structures.
It does. COSO's definition really highlights that ERM isn't just about having the right policies and procedures.
Okay.
It's deeply connected to the organization's culture.
Yeah.
Shared values and beliefs about risk, and also its capabilities and the everyday practices that are built into how things get done.
Mm-hmm.
It stresses that risk management should be fundamental to both setting the organization's direction and then actually putting those plans into action.
Right.
And it's all about creating, protecting, and growing value. Think of it as moving from just ticking boxes to really living and breathing risk awareness in every decision.
So it sounds like every organization really needs to figure out what risk and ERM mean for them specifically.
Absolutely. While these broad definitions give us a common language,
Yeah.
it's super important for each organization to develop its own clear understanding of these terms.
Right.
One that's aligned with their particular context, their industry, and the specific goals they're trying to achieve.
And it's not just about avoiding the negative, right?
Yeah.
ERM is also about helping the organization reach its broader goals.
Yeah.
Its mission, its vision, its core values,
Yeah.
and ultimately to create more value.
Exactly. And for ERM to be really effective, it needs to be embedded from the very top down. This means investing resources a certain level of maturity in how the organization thinks about and handles risk,
Mm-hmm.
and a strong system of assurance to make sure these principles are applied consistently across the board.
So ERM is this big picture top-down approach that looks at the whole risk landscape, how different risks connect and how they all contribute to the organization's overall risk exposure.
Exactly. It's about seeing the whole picture,
Okay.
understanding the combined effect of all those uncertainties that matter.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the history of risk management. Why is it helpful to understand how this field has evolved over time?
Well, as your material points out, what we even consider to be risk management has changed a lot over time.
Mm-hmm.
What people thought of as managing risk in the past looks very different from the enterprise-wide approach we see today.
Yeah.
I think understanding this evolution helps us make sense of where we are now,
Right.
and maybe even get a glimpse of where things are headed.
Mm.
Plus, looking back can often give us valuable insights into how different societies and organizations have responded to new and emerging threats and opportunities.
That makes sense.
It's also important to remember that these formal risk management frameworks, the ones we'll talk about later,
Yeah.
they're relatively new, really coming into their own from around 1995 onwards.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
So what were some of the big turning points in this evolution, then?
Well, the timeline in your unit guide is a good place to start.
Yeah.
It begins way back before the year 1500, where religious beliefs and superstition played a big role in how people understood and dealt with uncertainty.
Mm.
Then from 1500 to 1900, we see those beliefs fading as the Enlightenment and scientific thinking take hold.
Okay.
And the 20th century up to about 1970, that's when we see the development of specialized risk professions.
So things like the insurance industry and actuarial science.
Exactly. Areas where people develop specific expertise to understand and manage particular types of risk.
Right.
Then from about 1970 to 1995, there was this move towards a more general approach to risk management within organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And from 95 onwards, we've seen the profession really mature,
Okay.
with those formal risk management standards being introduced between 95 and 2004.
Right.
And then the development and updates of international frameworks like COSO and ISO 31000 between 2004 and 2018.
Yeah.
And more recently, from about 2010 to today, concerns about climate change and ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance factors,
Yeah.
they've become central to risk management thinking.
So it's interesting to see how big societal shifts and major events have really shaped how we think about and deal with risk. Your source mentions Kloman's analysis of risk management from 1914 to 2008.
Mm-hmm.
which highlights that growth of the specializations we were just talking about.
Right.
But it also points to a shift in focus since 2008 towards things like environmental and social responsibility,
Yeah,
greater accountability, and this growing importance of ESG.
absolutely. That's crucial.
Yeah.
We're seeing more and more regulation in these areas,
Yeah.
like the UK's Modern Slavery Act in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
and increasing demands for companies to disclose climate-related risks.
Right.
This reflects a broader expectation from society for organizations to be aware of and actively manage a much wider range of potential impacts,
Okay.
not just financial ones.
So understanding this history isn't just about looking back.
Yeah.
It's about grasping the forces that have shaped how we understand risk today.
Right.
And those forces continue to drive how it evolves.
Exactly. It provides the context for why ERM looks the way it does today.
Okay.
And it can even help us anticipate some of the challenges and opportunities that might be coming our way.
So let's talk about why enterprise risk management is so important for organizations now.
Okay.
We touched on some of the benefits earlier, but let's dig deeper into why it's become so crucial.
Well, at the core of it all, effectively managing risks, both the downsides and the upsides, is fundamental to any organization achieving its objectives.
Yeah.
Your source material talks about these soft benefits like improved communication and collaboration across different teams,
Mm-hmm.
and hard benefits like a better allocation of capital and ultimately a stronger return on investment.
And it looks at the importance of ERM through three lenses: organizational strategy, governance, and resilience.
Right.
Let's start with strategy. How does ERM contribute to an organization's strategic direction?
Well, ERM is becoming increasingly recognized as this vital part of the strategic planning process.
Okay.
Because it encourages a holistic view of risks and how they all connect. It gives a much more complete understanding of the organization's overall risk exposure.
Yes.
One key point from your sources referencing Chapman's work is the benefit of ERM in 4 key areas:
Okay.
informing strategy development, strengthening governance practices, improving organizational performance, and empowering people by making them more risk-aware.
The EY paper from 2019 also stressed that having a risk-informed strategy should be a top priority for the board of directors,
Yeah,
with ERM playing a bigger role in both shaping and executing that strategy.
exactly.
But they also warned about the negative consequences that can happen when ERM and strategic planning operate in silos.
Right. If the insights from ERM aren't feeding directly into decisions about where the organization is going and how it's going to get there, and if resources aren't directed towards addressing the most significant risks to those strategic goals,
Right.
then ERM isn't living up to its full potential.
Mm.
It risks becoming a bureaucratic exercise rather than a real strategic tool.
That makes sense. Now let's look at the governance side. What's the connection between ERM and good corporate governance?
Well, the UK's Chartered Governance Institute, they define governance as the system of rules, practices, and processes that direct and control a company.
Okay.
Good governance is about making sure the organization reaches its goals
Mm-hmm.
while also looking after the interests of its various stakeholders.
Right.
And ERM is a critical tool for achieving this. It gives the framework for the board and management to understand the key risks the organization faces
Yeah.
and to put the right controls and mitigation strategies in place.
And the EY Board Priorities 2022 report suggested that boards need to broaden their focus beyond just financial reporting
Yeah,
and pay closer attention to the changing business environment and emerging risks.
right.
They recommend a governance, risk, and compliance, or GRC approach.
But yes, that integrated approach, bringing together compliance, risk management, internal controls.
Yeah.
And often, internal audit is seen as essential for good leadership
Right.
and for achieving goals in today's increasingly complex and uncertain world.
Mm-hmm.
While boards often delegate the day-to-day management of ERM to others, their ultimate responsibility now extends to areas like ESG and geopolitical risks.
Okay.
This makes it more important than ever for them to have solid ERM insights to inform their decisions
Right.
and to give them assurance that the organization is being managed well.
Okay, finally, let's talk about resilience. Recent global events have really shown how vital it is for organizations to be able to withstand and recover from major disruptions.
True.
How does ERM contribute to that resilience?
The last few years have certainly tested the resilience of organizations everywhere,
Yeah.
with events like the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and the growing number of climate-related disasters.
Right.
ERM is crucial for building resilience
Yeah.
because it helps organizations identify and manage downside risk.
Okay.
Those events that could lead to negative outcomes.
Mhm.
But it's not just about preventing bad things from happening.
Okay.
It's also about enabling organizations to take calculated risks in pursuing worthwhile opportunities.
Right.
Effective risk management isn't about avoiding risk altogether. It's about being risk intelligent.
Yeah.
Understanding the potential downsides, but also being ready to seize opportunities when they come up.
That makes sense. And there's also increasing pressure from legal and regulatory bodies, as well as from all sorts of stakeholders,
Yeah,
for organizations to show their risk management skills
absolutely.
and to report on how they're handling key risks, particularly in areas like corporate social responsibility and ESG.
Absolutely. The expectation is growing that organizations will not only manage these risks well,
Mm-hmm.
but also be transparent about how they're doing it.
Okay.
They could face the same level of scrutiny as they do with their financial reporting.
So it sounds like ERM is this fundamental foundation for dealing with uncertainty,
Right.
achieving strategic goals, ensuring good governance, and building that long-term resilience
Exactly.
in a world that seems to be getting more complex and unpredictable all the time.
It's about protecting organizational value and also making it possible to pursue opportunities in an informed way.
Okay, now let's dive into the different ways organizations actually put enterprise risk management into practice.
Right.
Is there like one right way to do it that everyone agrees on?
Not at all.
Uh,
While the ultimate goal is the same,
okay.
to make sure you can achieve your goals while taking risks into account.
Mm-hmm.
The specific approaches and how sophisticated they are can vary a lot from one organization to the next.
Yeah.
As one of David Hilson's colleagues famously said, risk management is risk management is risk management.
Okay.
The core principles are consistent, but how you apply them needs to be tailored.
I see. And your source material introduces this pretty straightforward 4-step risk management process from Satarla.
Mm-hmm.
Define the context and objectives. Assess the risks, both threats and opportunities.
Right.
Manage those risks by putting controls in place.
Yeah.
And then monitor, review, and report on how effective those actions have been.
Right.
That seems like a pretty logical and adaptable framework.
It is, and that's the beauty of it.
Mhm. Yeah.
This basic process can be applied at any level of an organization,
Okay.
from the biggest strategic decisions made by the board all the way down to the day-to-day operations of individual teams.
Mm-hmm.
It also provides a common thread that can link together all these different risk management activities.
Right.
Those that might focus on specific areas like finance projects or health and safety,
Yeah.
which allows for a more integrated approach to ERM across the whole organization.
So it's about having that consistent process and a shared language for talking about risk
Exactly.
throughout the organization.
Yeah.
Even if the specific risks and how they're managed will differ from one area to the next,
Right.
your source really highlights how important this consistency and integration is.
Mhm.
They reference both the EY paper we discussed earlier and the ISO 31000 standard.
Yeah, if you don't have that consistency, you can end up with pockets
Yeah.
of risk information and management practices that don't connect,
Right.
which makes it really hard to get a complete picture of the organization's overall risk profile
Mhm.
and to make well-informed decisions at the enterprise level.
There's this really interesting anecdote in your material about a risk practitioner who keeps getting mistaken for someone who works in insurance or health and safety.
Yeah, I like that one.
It really shows how diverse the field of risk management can be.
It does.
And then it goes on to explore some of these specialized areas within risk management, finance, health and safety, and project risk management.
Right.
So let's start with financial risk management.
Okay, so financial risk management is a very mature and heavily regulated area.
Mm-hmm.
It focuses on risks that could have a direct financial impact on the organization.
Makes sense.
This covers a wide range from basic accounting practices and tax compliance to corporate governance and ensuring the organization's long-term financial viability,
Oh,
depending on the industry and where the organization is located.
right.
There are specific regulations they need to follow, like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the U.S., the Basel Accords for banks, and Solvency II for insurance companies. And operational risk, particularly in financial services, is a big area of focus.
And then there's health and safety risk management, which has a much longer history.
Yeah,
Efforts to protect workers go back to the 19th century.
absolutely. Health and safety is well established with a strong regulatory framework, all aimed at preventing harm to workers and the public. In the UK, the Health and Safety at Work, Etc. Act of 1974 is a cornerstone of this.
Yeah.
But similar regulations exist in pretty much every country, each with its own specific requirements and levels of enforcement.
And finally, project risk management.
Right.
since every project is by definition unique and temporary,
Yeah.
often with tight deadlines and budgets.
Mhm.
It makes sense that there'd be a special focus on managing the uncertainty that comes with project work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Projects are inherently complex and involve a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
This is due to their unique nature, their defined timelines,
Yeah.
their reliance on different stakeholders and third parties,
Right.
and all the assumptions that are made at the beginning. Project risk management became a recognized discipline in the mid-1950s,
Okay.
with professional associations like the International Project Management Association,
Mhm.
IPMA, the Project Management Institute, PMI, and the Association for Project Management, APM, developing formal guidance and standards.
Yeah.
The APM, for instance, defines a project as a unique, transient endeavor undertaken to achieve planned objectives,
Okay.
which really highlights all those inherent uncertainties that need to be managed.
So risk management is happening in all these specialized areas,
It is.
often with very specific regulations and established practices.
Yeah.
And ERM is the overarching approach that aims to bring consistency and integration to these diverse efforts.
Right.
It lets you see risk across the whole organization in a more holistic and strategic way.
Exactly. ERM provides that common language and a unifying framework for managing and reporting on risk across all parts of the organization.
Okay.
And this ultimately leads to better decision-making at every level.
This brings us to enterprise risk management standards and frameworks. It seems like there are several key ones that organizations often turn to for guidance.
Yes, and it's worth noting again that these general risk management standards and frameworks are fairly recent.
Mm-hmm.
The very first one, the Australian-New Zealand standard ASNZS 4360, only came out in 1995,
Okay.
which shows how this formal, structured approach to ERM is a relatively modern development.
Right.
These standards are designed to help organizations create a more consistent, effective, efficient, and coherent approach to managing risk.
Your source mentions ISO 31000, CICOSO 2004, and KYOSO 2017 as being particularly important general standards.
Exactly.
Let's start with ISO 31000 from 2018. What are its main principles and focus?
ISO 31000 is the international standard for risk management,
Okay.
and it centers around three key elements.
Okay.
The principles of risk management, the framework, and the process.
Can you break those down a little?
Sure. So the principles, these are the fundamental ideas behind effective risk management. The framework is the organizational structure and arrangements you put in place to integrate risk management into your overall governance and decision-making.
Mm-hmm.
And the process, those are the practical steps you take to identify, analyze, evaluate, treat, monitor, and review risks.
Okay.
It's widely considered the most internationally accepted standard, and it provides a very clear and adaptable guide.
I see.
It's important to note, though, that while it sets a benchmark for good practice, it's not designed for formal certification like some other ISO standards.
Okay.
If you're thinking about the supporting structure, the acronym RASP can be helpful.
RASP.
Risk Architecture Strategy and Protocols.
Okay.
It's a good way to visualize the elements you need to have in place to apply the ISO 31000 process effectively.
Got it. Next is COSO 2004, often called the ERM cube.
Yes.
What was the main reason behind its development?
So KYOSO, which stands for the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission, they developed this framework in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
It was mainly a response to a series of huge corporate financial scandals.
Like Enron.
Exactly. The goal was to give organizations a comprehensive framework for enterprise risk management
Right.
that would help them prevent fraudulent financial reporting. The ERM cube is a visual way to represent this framework.
Okay.
It has these three intersecting dimensions representing the different aspects of ERM.
Mm-hmm.
The risk management process itself, the organization's objectives, and the different levels or units within the organization where ERM needs to be applied.
Right.
It really boosted the profile and adoption of ERM.
And even though it's been updated, the 2004 framework is still useful, right?
Absolutely. It provides a solid foundation and a clear way to see the different parts of an effective ERM system.
Okay, so then what led to the updated COEC ONOSO 2017 version?
Well, the 2017 update was driven by the fact that the risk landscape is getting more and more complex, and the business environment is constantly evolving.
Right.
It puts more emphasis on integrating ERM throughout the entire organization,
Okay.
and it gives more detailed guidance on how risk management connects to strategy and performance. It also highlights how interconnected risks are,
Yeah.
and the crucial role of organizational culture in effective risk management.
So the focus shifted a bit.
Yeah, the focus shifted towards improving an organization's ability to create, preserve, and realize value,
Hmm.
all in alignment with its mission, vision, and core values.
Right.
This is built around 5 interrelated components and 20 supporting principles.
Okay.
It really shows a more mature understanding of how ERM contributes to an organization's overall success.
It sounds like a more holistic and deeply integrated view of ERM compared to the 2004 framework.
That's a good way to put it. It reflects a more sophisticated understanding of how risk management helps achieve an organization's big picture goals.
Got it. Your source also briefly mentions a bunch of other approaches and standards,
Yeah.
including industry-specific ones like COBIT for IT risk management, Basel III and Solvency II in finance,
Right.
various ISO standards for areas like occupational health and safety and business continuity,
Yeah,
as well as standards specific to project management.
absolutely.
It also touches on Hopkins' way of categorizing risk-related standards.
Okay.
You know, those focused on risk management itself, internal control, and building a risk-aware culture.
Hmm.
And there's even mention of specific guidance for sectors like charities in the UK and frameworks made for the public sector.
Right. And this all goes to show that while there are some universal principles and frameworks,
Yeah.
how you apply risk management often needs to be tailored to the specific context,
Right.
whether that's a particular industry, a sector, or even a certain function within an organization.
It makes sense that what works well for a heavily regulated financial institution might not be right for a small nonprofit.
Exactly.
And then we have the Orange Book 2020,
Yeah.
which was developed for the UK public sector, but offers some broader insights into basic risk management principles.
Right. Even though it's specifically for government organizations, its focus on those core principles,
Mm-hmm.
like governance and leadership integration, collaboration, and using the best information, robust risk management processes, and the importance of continual improvement.
Yeah.
All of that provides a valuable framework
Okay.
that organizations and other sectors can learn from as well.
It's more about the what and the why of good risk management,
Exactly.
rather than dictating the specifics of how to do it.
Right.
So there's this whole world of standards and frameworks out there,
There is.
each with its own focus and target audience.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they're all about guiding organizations towards more effective risk management.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Organizations can choose to adopt one of these frameworks.
Mhm.
They can combine elements from several, or even develop their own approach.
Okay.
But understanding these established models is crucial for anyone involved in risk management.
This has been a really in-depth look at enterprise risk management.
It has.
So let's try to sum it all up for you, our listener.
Right.
What are the key takeaways here?
Well, essentially, ERM is this comprehensive and integrated way to understand and manage all the uncertainties an organization faces,
Okay.
both the threats and the opportunities.
Right.
It's evolved from a more isolated focus on specific hazards to become a strategic discipline
Mm-hmm.
that's now considered vital for achieving goals, ensuring good governance, and building that long-term resilience.
Yeah.
We've seen that good risk management isn't just about avoiding negative outcomes.
Right.
It's about being smart, about taking risks to go after opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a variety of standards and frameworks out there to guide organizations as they implement ERM,
Right.
each with its own strengths and focus.
And now for a final thought for you, our listener.
Okay.
Considering all the definitions and frameworks we've discussed,
Yeah.
how well do you think organizations actually integrate managing potential opportunities
Hmm.
alongside that more traditional focus on threats?
That's a good question.
And what do you think might happen if there's a big imbalance in that approach?
Yeah. That's something to think about. And we'd also encourage you to consider
Yeah.
which of those standards or models we discussed
Mm-hmm.
really speaks to your own understanding or experience of risk management in your specific context.
We hope this deep dive has given you a solid understanding of enterprise risk management
Yeah,
and maybe sparked your interest to explore some of these areas in more detail.
absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.